Great romantic comedies used to be everywhere. When Harry Met Sally, Notting Hill, Love Actually, 10 Things I Hate About You, Groundhog Day, My Father the Hero.
I told Ben you weren't my father. I told him you were my lover.
These movies weren't just popular, they shaped how an entire generation imagined love. Awkward, imperfect, inconvenient, but ultimately worth it. And now, if a rom-com comes out today, it's marketed like an endangered species. A return to the classic rom-com. And yet, more often than not, the result feels hollow. Nostalgic in aesthetic, but completely disconnected from how dating actually feels now. So what happened? Did we just lose our optimism, or did the world perhaps change so much that the genre built on hopeful misunderstanding simply stopped making sense? To understand why the classic rom-coms have disappeared, we have to understand the cultural conditions that once made them possible. Long before Hollywood cameras existed, the roots of the rom-com stretch all the way back to classical theatre. Ancient Greek plays and Roman comedies already paired love with laughs, separations with reunions, and misunderstandings with happy endings, the building blocks of what would become the genre. Through the Middle Ages and Renaissance, these themes stuck around, reshaped by storytellers until they hit their most influential form in Shakespeare's work. Plays like The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Much Ado About Nothing, and Twelfth Night blended witty dialogue, gender play, disguises, and joyous resolutions in a way that would echo in storytelling for centuries. These patterns didn't just vanish when Shakespeare did. Even today, you can see it in films like 10 Things I Hate About You and She's the Man, modern takes on The Taming of the Shrew and Twelfth Night. And even Anyone But You was marketed as a loose adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing. While this video focuses on Hollywood's evolution, it's worth saying that funny love stories with optimistic endings appear across cultures, from classical Chinese theatre to traditional Indian plays, because the thrill of love tangled with humour is a universal human impulse. When cinema arrived, romantic comedy evolved with it. With the advent of sound and the strict Hays Code, filmmakers leaned into rapid-fire dialogue, physical comedy, and clever situations to keep stories about love both funny and acceptable. The screwball comedies of the 1930s and 40s, think It Happened One Night and Bringing Up Baby, paired spunky, smart women with befuddled men in stories full of social clashes and comedy of manners. In the 50s and 60s, as censorship loosened, sex comedies like Pillow Talk winked at audiences about flirtation and attraction, still grounded in the battle of the sexes, but with a softer edge. By the late 60s and 70s, cultural shifts brought about a more cynical tone, with films like Annie Hall questioning the very idea of happily ever after. But then came what most of us think of as the golden era of the rom-com, the 80s through the early 2000s. Films like When Harry Met Sally, Pretty Woman, Sleepless in Seattle, and Notting Hill perfected a formula that felt both real and magical. These movies weren't just about falling in love, they were about learning to trust love again, expressed through witty dialogue, memorable characters, and iconic meet-cutes. This was a moment when the genre felt not just popular, but definitive, when a rom-com could be a nationwide conversation, a cultural moment, and a personal affirmation that love, even at its most awkward and messy, was still worth believing in. And this is the version of the rom-com most of us are nostalgic for, not just because the movies were good, but because the conditions were right. These films came out during a moment when love still felt like a shared destination, when gender roles were changing but not fully destabilized, when economic futures felt possible, and when audiences broadly agreed on what a happy ending looked like. The rom-com didn't just entertain, it reassured. But if that was the peak, the obvious question is, why didn't it last? And is there a hope for another golden age? To try and answer this question, we are going to look at three things: heterofatalism, the economy, and technology. Heterofatalism describes a widespread feeling, especially among straight women, that heterosexual relationships are inherently disappointing, emotionally draining, and structurally unequal, even as people continue to pursue them anyway. Coined by academic Asa Saracen, the term captures a cultural mood rather than an organized movement, a shared exhaustion with dating men, shaped by unequal emotional labor, unmet expectations, and a growing sense that something about straight relationships just isn't working. You see it everywhere online. Men are trash, heterosexuality is a prison, dating is hell.
Girl clothes that guys do not like. And I know before you say, we don't give a f***.
So my biggest advice would be find a good woman. Treat her right and keep her by your side. Because life without a good woman is just, it ain't a life worth living. Grandma, I'm an adult.
That's nice.
Do you have any advice for me? Anything you think I should know?
Don't get married.
What?
Don't ever get married. Please don't get married. God, please.
What's interesting isn't just that people feel this way, it's that they keep dating anyway. Heterofatalism isn't about opting out of heterosexuality, it's about staying in it while loudly disavowing belief in it. I hate this, I don't believe in this, but here I am. Saracen argues that this pessimism is performative, not fake, but ritualized. It becomes a form of emotional self-defense. If you assume love will disappoint you, you never have to risk being sincere. Hope becomes embarrassing. Wanting too much becomes cringe. Vulnerability is something you preemptively joke your way around before it can hurt you. For women especially, heterofatalism functions like emotional armor. Straight culture has spent decades punishing women for being too attached, too intense, too hopeful, while simultaneously insisting that marriage and motherhood are the ultimate goal. In this contradiction, pessimism becomes a shortcut to dignity. I didn't fail at love. Love itself is broken.
Do you remember growing up how boys would always tell girls, get back in the kitchen or make me a sandwich as an insult? It was like a quick, degrading thing that guys would say to you. Like you'd be in a disagreement with them and they would just tell you to get back in the kitchen. And that is the thing, is like men think that traditionally feminine roles are degrading. They think it's degrading that you would be in the kitchen making them a sandwich, which is why they hurl it at you as an insult. And I'm just thinking about it because right now there's this big right-wing push to get women back into the home, and conservative men are constantly telling us like, you shouldn't have a job, you should actually be a wife and a mother, and you should give birth, and you should get back into the kitchen, and you should make me a sandwich. And the messaging is like, well, the home is where you would be the most happy, and the home is where you would be the most valued. And I feel like I'm being gaslit because I'm like, wait, you don't value women who work in the home. You told me it was degrading and that I should be like embarrassed to make you a sandwich. You telling me that women are the most valued in the home is the exact opposite message that I've been getting directly from men for my entire life.
Men have their own versions of heterofatalism too. Incels and MGTOW operate from the same core belief, that heterosexuality is fundamentally broken, but reroute it into resentment, entitlement, and conspiracy. Different aesthetics, same despair. Heterofatalism feels radical and it's important to name, but it doesn't actually change anything. And you can see how this cultural shift makes many golden era rom-coms feel incompatible with the present. Take My Best Friend's Wedding, for example, where the central premise hinges on the panic of being unmarried at 28. The idea of being single is more horrifying than settling down with potentially the wrong person. Classic rom-coms almost always end at the moment the couple gets together. Togetherness itself is the resolution. They don't show the marriage afterwards, the negotiation, the labor, the risk, and that's the part that more and more people, especially women, are deeply wary of now. This is why a film like The Graduate feels like a turning point. It looks like a rom-com on the surface, but its ending is unresolved, awkward, and quietly unsettling. The desire is fulfilled and then immediately questioned. Brilliant, but uncomfortable, and maybe a little too real for a genre built on wish fulfillment. As the standard rom-com has lost its footing, we've seen a rise in films that begin like romantic comedies, but mutate into thrillers or horror. Movies like Fresh, Blink Twice, Companion take familiar dating dynamics and expose the dangers underneath them. The climax isn't winning the man, it's surviving him, regaining autonomy and escaping objectification. In many ways, these films feel like an artistic correction, a Grimm's fairy tale for adults, and a cathartic release of long-suppressed rage. We also see reimaginings of classic rom-com logic. The unwavering male persistence once framed as romantic, he just won't give up, is now often read as creepy or threatening. Stories like Pretty Woman get revisited with tragic or ambivalent endings. What was once charming optimism is now viewed through a lens of power and consequence. And it's important to say, analyzing interrogating these tropes matters. We should interrogate what they normalized, what entitlements they reinforced, but it's also possible to go too far in the opposite direction. Fantasy is not the same as literal desire. As ContraPoints has pointed out in a brilliant essay on Twilight, the scenarios we enjoy watching on screen or reading in a romance novel aren't always things we want enacted in real life. You can critique a trope without erasing the emotional need it once fulfilled. The golden era of rom-coms, the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, coincided with a period of relative economic optimism and a thriving mid-budget film market, propped up by things like DVD sales and home video. Wages went further, home ownership felt attainable, student debt wasn't yet a lifelong personality trait, and being a young professional in a major city didn't automatically mean 4 flatmates and threatening landlords to finally get the worst possible repairs you've ever seen done. All of this created a cultural atmosphere where optimism, not just romantic but economic, felt plausible. Take When Harry Met Sally, an incredible film, genuinely, but Harry's apartment is insane. This man was a mid-level sports writer. And yes, even at the time, audiences noticed it was a bit unrealistic. The choice was deliberate. The vast empty space reflects Harry's bachelor lifestyle, a kind of emotional blank canvas contrasted with Sally's warmer, cozier home. But rewatching it now, that apartment doesn't just signal character, it signals unattainable fantasy for many. It's just a little harder to be swept away by the love story when you're pulled out of the film wondering how someone with a job like yours could afford a place like that, while you're juggling rent, food, debt, and low-level panic about the fact you'll probably never even own a studio flat, let alone whatever the f this mansion warehouse is. Rom-coms have always skewed upper middle class, and audiences used to accept that as part of the fantasy. But today, when wealth inequality is more visible and economic anxiety is more widespread, those same depictions can feel jarring. It's difficult to emotionally invest in a romance when the lifestyles on screen feel less structurally possible. You can see this shift clearly in Sex and the City. The original series worked in the late 90s and early 2000s not just because of its wit and chemistry, but because the characters' lives broadly aligned with the economy and dating culture of the time. Carrie's apartment may have been slightly optimistic for someone who wrote 1 column a week, but she still struggled financially, which made her relatable. Miranda was successful, but stressed. Money still mattered. It created stakes. And just like that, those stakes are gone. In the new series, the characters are now extremely wealthy, insulated from most real-world consequences, and oddly disconnected from the audience they're meant to reflect. Combined with chaotic writing, awkward character shifts, and depictions of modern dating that feel more like HR seminars than lived experiences. What's left are mostly rich people problems dressed up as cultural relevance. But what about crazy rich Asians? I hear you telepathically screaming at me. First of all, relax. Second of all, yes. And that's why it's such an interesting exception. On paper, it shouldn't work. Private islands, billionaire families, a wedding that costs more than most people will earn in their lifetime. And yet it works beautifully. The difference is perspective. Rachel Chu isn't rich herself. She's an economics professor. She enters this world as an outsider, just like the audience. The wealth is framed as spectacle, not something we're meant to identify with. More importantly, the core conflicts are classic rom-com material: a disapproving mother, cultural misunderstandings, love versus family expectation, individual desire versus tradition. The wealth amplifies those tensions instead of replacing them. The film also arrived as a major milestone for Asian representation in Hollywood, which gave it weight beyond the romance itself. For many viewers, seeing Asian characters framed as desirable romantic leads was the real breakthrough. The money was just the backdrop. And yeah, sure, there were critiques about glorifying extreme wealth or ignoring inequality, but most audiences weren't looking for a critique of capitalism. They wanted a joyful, glossy romance that knew exactly what kind of fantasy it was selling. And that clarity made all the difference. And that's why Anyone But You is worth mentioning, because it quietly proved something important. Despite lukewarm reviews, Anyone But You became the first rom-com in nearly a decade to cross 100 million worldwide, breaking an 8-year drought and even surpassing Romeo plus Juliet as the highest grossing Shakespeare adaptation. loose Shakespeare adaptation. It wasn't prestige cinema. It might not be remembered in the ranks of the golden era rom-coms, but you know, it was attractive people, good chemistry, a destination wedding, and permission to be a little glossy and dumb. And you know what? Audiences showed up. Which suggests the problem was never that people stopped wanting romantic comedies, it's that the industry stopped making ones that felt like actual movies. When a rom-com is given theatrical space, stars with real heat, and a clear sense of tone, the appetite is still there. But Anyone But You is the exception, not the rule. Another major economic factor is the collapse of the mid-budget film altogether. Historically, rom-coms lived in that space, not tiny indies, not massive blockbusters, but something in between. As critic Scott Maslow points out, the so-called death of the rom-com was overhyped. Audiences didn't reject love stories, studios stopped making mid-budget movies. Franchise IP, superhero films, and the disappearance of DVD revenue made it harder for a $30 to $40 million film to quietly recoup its costs over time. Rom-coms also suffered disproportionately because of misogyny. They were dismissed as chick flicks, underpromoted, and treated as culturally disposable. A genre centered on women, both on screen and behind the camera, became easy to sideline. And all of this matters because romantic comedies are cultural mirrors. They work best in moments of perceived stability, when audiences can believe in both romantic and economic mobility. The classic rom-com promises love and a future, emotional security paired with material stability. In an era defined by precarity, that premise starts to feel hollow. Modern audiences can still accept fantasy though, but only when it's clearly framed as fantasy or when emotional stakes feel recognizable. What they struggle with is being asked to believe in relatable romances unfolding inside lifestyles that now feel fundamentally unreachable. And while Crazy Rich Asians and Anyone But You show that rom-coms can still break through, they also underline how rare those conditions have become. But just as cinemas stopped making room for small emotional adult love stories, something else quietly changed. We all started carrying a screen in our pockets, one perfectly designed for intimacy, repetition, and low-stakes romance. The rom-com didn't disappear, it just changed where it lived. If the rom-com was going to survive anywhere, it was always going to be on streaming. Everything that made romantic comedies less attractive to Hollywood studios makes them perfect for platforms like Netflix, Prime, and Hulu. Streaming doesn't need a rom-com to be a cultural event. It needs it to be comforting, rewatchable, something you put on alone or half paying attention to, or when you want to believe in love again without committing to 3 hours in a cinema seat. That's why the dominant tone of modern streaming rom-coms is softer, safer, and more disposable. Hallmark movies thrive in this environment. Emotionally simple, low stakes, and endlessly repeatable. They don't compete with the craft of golden era rom-coms, but they fulfill the same emotional function. Reassurance, familiarity, and a guaranteed happy ending. And if you follow that logic far enough, you arrive at microdramas. Microdramas, also known as short dramas, are ultra-short, mobile-first romance stories often broken into 60 to 90-second episodes. The first few episodes are usually free, designed to hook you, before locking the ending behind a paywall. Originating in China, the format exploded globally and is now gaining serious traction in Western markets, particularly in the US. Their appeal is simple: heightened emotion, instant stakes, and immediate payoff. Jealousy, betrayal, secret affairs with billionaires, shocking identity reveals, reunited lovers, all delivered at the speed of doom scrolling. There's titles like Pampered by an Amnesiac Husband, OMG, My Doctor is a Billionaire, or Daddy is the Vampire King. Might sound absurd, but they're doing something very recognizable. They strip romance down to its most addictive components. Familiar tropes, extreme fantasy, cliffhangers, and the promise that emotional justice will arrive quickly. Over the past year, production quality has noticeably improved, better lighting, stronger performances, tighter scripts, but what really keeps audiences hooked isn't realism, it's efficiency. These stories don't ask you to believe in the world, they just ask you to feel something immediately. In many ways, microdramas are rom-coms evolved for the algorithm. Same fantasies, less patience. There's another shift here that's harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. During the golden era of rom-coms, culture was more centralized. Fewer TV channels, fewer films, fewer places to go online. Most people consumed the same stories, which meant romance itself could be written as broadly appealing. There was a rough cultural consensus on what dating looked like, what adulthood meant, and what a happy ending was supposed to be. That consensus doesn't exist anymore. Today, culture is fragmented. Algorithms don't aim for mass appeal, they aim for you. That was a bit much. It's so hot. I'm in Australia right now. Oh my God, sorry. Algorithms don't aim for mass appeal, they aim for you specifically. Dating has splintered into subcultures with widely different values, expectations, politics, and power dynamics. And the more specific your idea of romance becomes, the harder it is to turn it into a universally satisfying fantasy. This is where something like Sex and the City starts to struggle. The original series exaggerated different relationship types, but still spoke to a broad audience. The reboot tries to reflect a hyper-diverse, hyper-online dating landscape, and in doing so, loses the escapism. The more you try to represent everyone's reality, the less room there is for fantasy. The upside of this saturated market is obvious. Whatever your romantic fantasy is, however specific, however niche, there's probably content made just for you. The downside is that when quantity and specificity are rewarded, writing quality and emotional depth often aren't. Romance hasn't disappeared. It's just been broken into smaller pieces, tailored to smaller audiences, and delivered faster than ever. So what we're left with is a genre split into two. Big screen rom-coms struggle because they're expected to feel relatable inside an economy that no longer is. Small screen romance thrives by abandoning realism altogether, leaning into fantasy, niche appeal, or outright absurdity. The classic romantic comedy promised more than chemistry. It promised stability, a decent job, a livable city, a sense that love would be rewarded with a life that worked. When the economic floor fell out, that fantasy cracked. And when the mid-budget film collapsed alongside it, the genre lost its natural home. Streaming platforms became the new middle class of romance. Not glamorous, not theatrical, but functional. They offered intimacy instead of spectacle, comfort instead of aspiration, repetition instead of event status. Love stories didn't need to feel big anymore. They just need to feel available. I got a green screen. I'm gonna test it out. Enjoy the visuals. So maybe the golden age of the romantic comedy didn't end because audiences stopped wanting love stories. It ended because the world that made those love stories feel universal stopped existing. So what's the future of rom-coms, and is there, hope for another golden age? Well, I don't think it'll ever be like the classic age again, but it's not like there are no great rom-coms today. There definitely are. Films like Silver Linings Playbook or Palm Springs, these films don't promise perfect timing or fairy tale stability. They ask whether love can survive uncertainty instead. They're stories about people who are anxious, damaged, stuck, or deeply unsure of their place in the world. Love isn't a reward for personal success. It's something messy people build while still struggling. The golden era worked because falling in love felt like the beginning of something. A future, a life, a shared stability. Today, love is still compelling, but the future is harder to picture. And when the ending feels uncertain, the fantasy has to work a lot harder to earn it, in my opinion. So that's my little video on rom-coms, a genre I deeply love, and I hope I provided some insight. I would love to see your thoughts below. Also, consider a like and a subscribe. I'm still a newish channel, so it really means a lot to me, and I hope to see you in the next video. Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy life.